thank you everybody for coming to SAC Interactive. My name's Nolan. On my screen, to my side over here is Bill. Bill and I run this user group. We meet the third Wednesday of every month. It used to be in person at the Hacker Lab building in downtown Sacramento, but because COVID is COVID and destroying everything, we now meet here in my Zoom room. We'll see what happens after the lockdowns are done. So third Wednesday of the month, always here at 6:30 p.m. California time. It's free and open to anyone who wants to be here. The topic is always something to do with web or mobile development. The actual technology we use varies from month to month. Sometimes it's JavaScript, sometimes it's some new, game technology like we're going to look at tonight. Other times it's how to build an iPhone app or kind of anything in between the two ends of web and mobile development. If you have any ideas for talks you'd like to see in the future, please contact myself or Bill and let us know. If you're interested in being a presenter, please contact myself or Bill and we'll happily chat about when we can get you on the calendar to do things. Bill, anything else we need to go over while we're doing this stuff?
I think we're good. If anybody's new here and you want to get on our mailing list, you can just put your email in the chat and we'll add you, and we promise we won't send you spam.
Yes, please do that. Yeah, drop us an email. Let you know when things next. We'll let you know what we have going on next month. With that, I think Nick, the floor is yours, my friend.
Wait,
I should intro you first, I guess. Sorry. So we've got Nick Raboy doing his talk, making games and taking names. He's going to tell us all about building video games for various platforms. Now it's yours, Nick.
Sure. Do you want to give me screen sharing
I
permission?
can do that. You should be all set.
Sweet. Do you see my screen?
I've got, Unity with your creatures on the backdrop.
Perfect. So I'm Nick Raboy. I am over here in Tracy, so not Sacramento like I think most of you, but I've been to SAC Interactive plenty of times with Nolan. So I actually am a developer advocate at MongoDB, but I do game development as a hobby, so not really associated with MongoDB, although sometimes it is. But tonight I figured it would be fun to make a cool little game. So to show you that, you know what, you don't have to be a seasoned game developer to build awesome games. You don't even have to be a great programmer to build games. And these games will work for mobile, PC, Mac, whatever. You can even cross-compile it to the video game consoles like PlayStation and the Nintendo Switch. So we're going to go over a few different topics when it comes to game development, some of the essentials. We're going to be focusing on 2D games for tonight. So it's going to be a little different if you wanted to do 3D, but a lot of the same concepts would still carry over. So I do have Unity up. So as of right now, I think I'm maybe a version or two behind in terms of the Unity version. So something relatively recent would work fine. Anything that I do can be reproduced. And I encourage you to stop me and ask questions throughout the way. I don't know if I'll be able to see the chat. So maybe Nolan can just open up the microphones for people or get people in. But we'll see how this goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a new project. So this is going to be a 2D project with Unity. And I realize that there's going to be some times when my font is going to be a little small. I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm looking at. And I'm even going to try to zoom in wherever possible. But there will be exceptions to that. So I'm going to create a new 2D project. This is going to be, I'm going to call it SAC Interactive. And I'm just going to create it on my desktop. And it'll take just a minute or two to create. And you don't need to be using a PC to build these games. You can be on a Mac as well. In terms of the programming that we're going to be doing for tonight while this loads, we will be using C#, but it's not going to be anything too in the weeds. So if you're not a C# developer, you should be able to get by perfectly fine. Has anyone, while this is loading, has anyone created a game before? either
Not
professionally
in
or
Unity, but yes.
Wait,
Not
I
in the
see
last
some hands
decade.
moving in
So.
decades.
Yeah, not in the last 2 decades.
Ooh.
All right. Well,
Unless you
things
count like little prototypes in some of the, like Construct or some of the other little drag and drop game engines.
Yeah, sure. Things have gotten, I think, a lot easier in the past few years, specifically when it comes to game development. So this may inspire you, hopefully inspire you to get back into it or try something. Maybe if you've got kids, make something with your kids or for your kid. So this is a blank Unity 2D project. Up in this area, this represents our scene. So you can have multiple scenes in a game. Generally, you will have multiple scenes, and they represent a very specific topic in your game, kind of like in a TV show or a movie. And you're going to have numerous game objects in a scene. So, for example, by default, it added a camera. And regardless on whether or not it's a sprite, if it's some kind of audio, if it's anything else, it's still going to be a game object. The components that we add to that game object define really what it does, and we're gonna get into that. So if I were to hit play, we would just have a blue screen. And this is a little preview right here, and I'll zoom in. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a game object, and you can do that by right-clicking in this area, or you can go up to game object at the top and create one that way. And let me see if I can zoom in. If this becomes more annoying to look at than without it, please let me know as well. So I'm going to try to zoom in. So I'm going to right click in the hierarchy area, and I'm going to say create empty. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me an empty game object, which I'm going to call player. Now it's nothing. It's just a kind of a placeholder as is right now. If I were to play the game right now again in the preview window, you wouldn't see anything. You'd still see that blue screen because we haven't defined what this game object is or what it's supposed to do. So we're going to define it by using the component. So we're going to add a component to it. And what we're going to add is we're going to add a sprite renderer because our player, this is going to represent our playable character in the game. So you would add a sprite renderer. Now, even if I were to hit play still, even though that I do have a sprite renderer as of now, it's still going to be nothing because I don't have an image associated to it. Now, rather than me trying to create images here because I'm not an artist, you can actually visit the Unity asset store, and they have plenty of free assets that you can take advantage of. Or you could pay for assets. I've paid for some assets. I've used the free versions. They're all very reasonably priced. In particular, for our playable character, we're going to use this astronaut sprite. This is a free asset that you can obtain from the Unity store. And really, it looks kind of like this. And I'll see if I can zoom in. Oops. So it's just a bunch of different possible images to represent the astronaut. So assuming that you've created a Unity account, what you can do is you can add to your assets, and it would just add it. And then you can access them within the Unity editor, which we're going to do right now. So if I went to Window, and if I went to Package Manager, and I use the little drop-down toggle to say My Assets, these are the assets that I've either paid for or added to my account in some fashion. So you'll notice that the 2D character astronaut is already there, and I can import it into my project. And it takes just a minute or two to import. And it'll pick up. I know it's going a little slow right now, but we're going to pick up. As soon as this loads, we're gonna get it rendering on the screen, and then we're gonna explore what we can actually do to manipulate this sprite. And we're not gonna touch any code until probably the halfway mark of tonight. So we're gonna be able to accomplish quite a bit without actually writing any code.
Excuse me, Nick.
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me. All right. I have a question. Did you already
Sure.
say what you're making? I might have missed that.
Yeah. So we're gonna be building a 2D game. It's not going to be anything like something that you would probably want to submit to the store or anything, but it should leave you with plenty of fundamentals to take and build your own game. So everything we explore should get you started, and we will have something playable by the end of tonight.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so it's imported. So if I went down into my asset area down here in the bottom left, I now have the name of the author of that asset, which is copy Sprite. And the astronaut has plenty of different things. So they've provided us with tile maps, some sprite images, some animations. We're going to be taking advantage of a few of them. But to start, I'm going to open up the sprites directory. Let me zoom in a little bit. And we're going to add a sprite to this player game object. So I'm going to look for the idle sprite. So I've already seen this asset before. I know it's provided here. I know that there's an idle sprite right here. And it includes a lot of different frames for what we're going to see as an idle animation. But we're not going to animate quite yet. So we're going to look at the idle 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my game object, player, and I am going to drag idle 0 into the sprite area. So now I have an image associated with that particular game object, and I can move it around wherever I want on the scene, and I can hit play. So it doesn't do anything. It's just a random image asset for our game right now. So not particularly interesting. So let's go ahead and add some physics to that now. So let's add some gravity to this sprite. Let's make it kind of what you would expect in a playable game. So we're going to add another component to the game object. This time around, I'm going to add a rigid body. So just by adding the rigid body, we now have physics on this particular sprite. And by default, dynamic physics will allow us to have things like gravity and so forth, as well as potential collisions. Whereas if we were to do kinematic, it would be, we would still have the physics, it would move, but the collisions would be handled differently. And then static, the player would not move at all. So we're going to leave it as dynamic. Now, if I were to hit play, now the sprite kind of just falls off the screen because gravity is being applied forever. So what we need is something for this sprite to fall on, so that way we're not falling endlessly. So we're going to add another game object. So I'm going to, instead of adding an empty game object, this time around what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 2D object, I'm going to say Tilemap, and I'm going to say rectangular. So a tile map is kind of like a world builder. We can actually paint our world kind of like what you'd see if you remember Microsoft Paint in the old days, where you can just drag pixels around and build your images that way. We're going to build our image, but this is actually going to be our world. So before we do that, I'm going to look at another asset. So one that I like using is called Pixel Adventure. This is another free asset. And it gives us all kinds of information. It gives us these little sprites right here, but it also gives us access to the actual level assets as well. So I'm going to add that to my project. So I'm going to go back to the package manager, and I'm going to click on Pixel Adventure 1, and I'm going to import it. Now there's numerous ways to create a level in game development. You can use a tile map, or you can create a very large image to represent your world, or you could combine bits and pieces of images together in your own fashion as well. The tile map is great because you can work with smaller images. With one very large image, it might play fine on a PC, but on a mobile device, it may not. I know a lot of the devices in the United States, they're very powerful, but in other countries, you get less powerful mobile devices. So the Tilemap Editor, you're only rendering small bits and pieces, you're reusing bits and pieces, and it's only rendering what's in your viewport right here. And I don't know if that's visible. It's a white line. It's just a box. This is our viewport, and everything in it is actually going to be rendered. So we added Pixel Adventure 1. It created a new directory within our assets directory, and this is just a directory on the file system. So there's inside of our project, there's an assets directory, and all of this is found right there. So it provided us assets, and we're going to be looking at terrain. So this is more or less what you would see from a tile map. So just little squares, and these are 16 by 16 pixels. We do have to change this a bit though. So if I click on this image, it thinks that each of our images inside of this sprite sheet is 100 by 100. It's not the case because we know it's 16 by 16. And we can leave it as 100, but our images are going to be very small in that sense because it's incorrectly sized for what we're expecting. So it's best if we change this to 16. So it just calibrates what individual images are for this particular terrain. Now, what I want to do is I want to click on Tilemap, and I want to go to Window, and I want to go to 2D, and I want to look at the tile palette. And I'm going to drag this, I'm going to dock it, so that way it's a little easier to see. Oh, it's not docking. There we go. All right, so this is the tile palette, and we have one by default. I think it came with the astronaut. We're not going to use that one. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it Pixel Adventure 1. I'm going to create it. It's going to ask me where to save it. I'm just going to save it in the same directory as my Pixel Adventure assets. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to now drag the assets over. So I'm going to click on not the image itself, but the individual images inside our core image. So this is technically a sprite sheet, which is many images packed into one image file with the information necessary for Unity to break it up into smaller images. So I'm going to select all of them. And I'm just going to drag it over. And I'm going to select the same folder. I'm going to create all kinds of caching data for me to work with. So it added them all. And if I were to zoom in, each one of these squares is a new tile that can be used. So to actually use them, what I would do is I would select the tile map that I added. And let's go ahead and say that we wanted to add some grass here. So I'm going to click on the corner, and I am going to click that tile. Just going to drag it over. And that's kind of all you have to do when it comes to designing your world with tile maps. You just drag and drop. And I didn't even drag. I just held the cursor down, and it did a Photoshop type fashion. So let's go ahead and finish that. I'll zoom out a little bit. Add some corners. Maybe I want to add a square in there. Oh, that doesn't look right. That's because I have the wrong corner. There we go. So you just have to play around with what they provide. That should be a different corner as well. Maybe I want to select over here. And maybe just for the heck of it, I want to have another square in there. Make a nice little fancy level. So if I were to play it now, the player still falls through the screen because as of right now, the tile map is just an image. It's just an image that we created using smaller tiles. So we need to add collision information to our tile map as well as our player. So let's go ahead and first add it to the player. So we have the physics, but no collision information. So I go ahead and add a new component. And remember, game objects, you're just adding components to game objects to really define what it is they are and what it is that they do. So I'm going to add a box collider. So there's several different colliders in Unity. The box collider being the most basic. So it's just literally a box that defines where the collision boundaries are. There are much more sophisticated colliders in Unity. But as you use the more sophisticated colliders, you do take performance hits because it has to do more calculations to determine how the collisions happen. So you'll see that the box is quite large in comparison to our astronaut right now. So it's a good idea that we edit the collider. I click the edit button down here. And if I zoom in a bit, we can now drag the corners in to roughly around where the collider should be represented with our box. So roughly there, and I'll stop editing by clicking that button again. So we have the main box, which is nothing. It has to do with the rigid body, and then we have the actual collision box around the astronaut, which is in green. I'm not sure if it's too small to see or not. If I were to run it, he'd still fall through the floor because the floor itself doesn't have any collision information on it. So if I click on the tile map, I can add a component to the tile map. And instead of using a box collider, because I'm not working with one solid image now, I can use a Tilemap Collider. So just like that, if I were to run it, the astronaut should hit the floor and not continue to fall. But if I stop it, you'll notice that, well, hopefully, I'm not sure what exactly you can see versus what I see. There are green kind of dividers or cell spacing on the tile map versus the white that is outside of the tile map. So the green represents collision areas on those tile because we added the Tilemap Collider, and it adds it to every tile, all corners of that tile. Which from a operations perspective, it's consuming as far as resources go, because your player will likely never reach the top portion right here of this tile. So we want to optimize how the colliders work. And this would apply to, it could apply to your whole level as well. So what we would do is we would add another component, and we would add a composite collider. So when we add a composite collider, after I finish adding it, what it's going to do is it's only going to add reachable areas. So basically, it would add a collision boundary around the entire area, not in between. So what I would want to do is I would want to say used by composite. And just like that, just by adding the composite collider and clicking that box, the green went away on the inside, and now we have green around the outside. It did add a rigid body. So what we will want to do, because if I hit play, I think both of them are going to fall off the screen now. Yeah, they both fell off the screen because the rigid body has to do with physics. We don't want the ground to fall, so we're going to make it static. And just like that, I can hit play. And, well, now my astronaut doesn't fall off the screen, and neither does my tile map. So we're progressing a little bit now. So the astronaut, not too exciting, he's just standing there. So, well, maybe we want to animate the astronaut now. So let's go ahead and stop. And just kind of a tip and trick here for Unity, make sure that you are not currently in a preview when you try to make changes to something. If your preview is enabled and you make changes and you stop the preview, it basically rolls back all of your changes. So when you make edits in Unity, you want to make sure that you're not in preview unless you want to do experiment. Then you can leave preview on, and it would be non-destructive. So that'll get you at least once in your Unity development journey. So let's start animating that astronaut now. And again, please stop me if you have any questions about what's happening. So what I can do is I can click on player. We want to add another component. So I'm going to add a component called the Animator. So the Animator is an animation controller, and an animation controller controls which animation clips you should be using at any given time. So you're going to have animation clips, which is the actual animation, and then the animation controller defines how you get to those clips. So we have neither right now. So we're just going to leave it as is for now. I'm going to go into my astronaut resources area. I'm going to go to sprites. Actually, I'm going to go to animations. So they provide you with a lot of animations. Rather than trying to use what they've already provided, I'm going to create one from scratch to show you the process of actually animating something and controlling something. So what I'm going to do is I am going to right click to create a new item in our assets folder. And I'm going to scroll to create, and I'm going to choose animation controller. And I'm going to name it astronaut. Now, if I clicked on player and I scroll down to that animation controller, now I can drag and drop astronaut into where it says none. So now the astronaut animation controller is associated with this astronaut. And if I were to open it, this is what we'd see. We'd basically see, I forget the name of, this is like a flowchart kind of thing. It basically decides how you get to each point in your animations. So right now we have no animations. It's empty. We just have a controller. So we're going to take advantage of the already existing animations, which is when I showed you the sprites. If I clicked on, say, for example, idle, it provided me all of these sprites. it's just an animation of those sprites. And we're going to see how to create an animation soon as well. So I'm going to go back to animations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the idle animation. So I'm going to say idle down, and I'm going to drag it into the animation controller. And you can see that it added a transition by default from entry to idle down. So the entry animation is the default animation. This animation will play as soon as we hit play in the game. So if I were to hit play, we have the sprite is now kind of dancing up and down. So that's the default animation. Now we know that we also want the astronaut to walk. So we're going to add more animations that are not the default entry animation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for walk. Somewhere in here. All right, walk side, and I'm going to drag it in. So it's not associated to anything. I could play it, it wouldn't do anything. It would still just do the idle down animation. So what I want to do is I want to right click on any state, and I want to say make transition, and I want to drag it to the walk side. So that means that I can get to walking side from any other animation state. So whether or not I can be idle, I can transition into walk side. If I were jumping, I can transition to walk side. It doesn't matter. So that's not the end of the story though. So we need a way to actually transition. So we can add logic to the actual transition itself. And to do that, we would go to parameters within the animator, and we would add a new parameter. So this is a variable associated to the actual animation controller. We're going to say bool. And for this, our variable is going to be called, we're just going to call it do walk. So it means that we want to start walking. And it's false by default, so it's not checked. And when we click on the transition line, I can go to the conditions and I can click on the plus, and the condition would be do walk is true. And that will trigger the actual change to the walk animation. Now,
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
Sorry, we had a couple of questions in the chat. Do you want me to save this till the end or interrupt you as we go?
No, it's probably best we interrupt right now.
Okay. So Linda was asking, is the tile map random, or does Unity know which tiles are related to each other? And is it bad to have a lot of add-ons, example, box colliders or animators?
Yeah. So in regards to the tile map, so if I look at the, I'll just go back to the one that we were using. Somewhere in here. So there's a concept of sprite sheet. And let's see if maybe I can actually open it inside of the project structure here. That one might not be the best example of the bunch. And they might be the same. Anyways, close enough. Anyways, that's one single image. I don't know if I can zoom in here. So it's one single image. And usually what happens is there's some kind of meta file associated to it, or they've already done in this case, they've already done the chopping for us in Unity. But in a lot of circumstances, even though that this, say for example, right here looks like one kind of image that makes sense, the author has made the dimensions of this image pretty uniform. So that way they could be sliced up, in this case, as 16 by 16 squares. And in Unity, maybe I can show you right here. In Unity, if I were to go to the Sprite Editor, I realize this is a little, I can zoom in. So I can actually choose how I want to chop and slice this image up in Unity. And when I do that, that's how I come up with these individual images for this master image. So there's various ways to do that. I have a tool. What a tool that I use. I already forgot the name of the tool that I use. Texture Packer. Texture Packer is a good tool. let's see if I can go to the site. So for example, Texture Packer is a sprite packer. There's a free version. You can provide it images, and basically it packs it together to compress it as small as possible. It gets rid of any kind of white space. And then in Unity, essentially, you have to break up what was packed. But the cool thing about a program like Texture Packer is it gives you the metadata that Unity understands. So that way it could automatically separate those images for you, even though that they're packed. I don't know if that kind of stuff answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's strange to use the tile palette and tile maps at first, but just I mean, at the end of the day, you're working with squares. We defined our squares as 16 by 16, and it's just a palette for art, and you just draw it on the screen. The second part of that was with the colliders. Is that right, Nolan?
Yeah, it was Tilemap Random, or is each and is it bad to have a lot of add-ons, like a lot of box colliders or a lot of animators?
I don't think so. So as far as the colliders go, you have to pay attention to what type of collider you're using. I think there's a pixel perfect collider where if you have some pretty exotic objects, I mean, this is kind of rectangular, but imagine having something that is really, really strange in appearance, and you wanted to get an actual collision box or collision boundary that traces the entire object. That's pricey to have in a game. So it depends. I don't think, I mean, you can have a pretty extravagant world with the tile map, and I'll add to this real quick. So let's go ahead and maybe let's add a platform, right? So let's see if we can create something. So I have the tile map selected. So I added a platform. I don't know if you can see it. There is a there's a green boundary around it, around the entire thing, because we're still using the composite. It's just that we don't have anything in the middle. Everything on this is collidable. And then we still have the collisions around here. I don't think there's any kind of negative from a performance perspective if you use it like this. It's only going to be processing what's inside of this viewport. Remember that. I mean, you could have some busy viewports, but for the tile map, it's going to ignore everything outside until it's time to render. And if I were to click play, the astronaut will now fall and stop there, rather than down here. And we'll move the astronaut next. Going back to the animator though, and please stop me if there's questions. We were working on the do walk. So we have the transition, we have the conditions for do walk. It's going to transition to walk side if it's true. We need to tell it when to stop walking. So we need to add another transition from the walk side to the exit. And in this case, the condition is going to be when do walk is false. Now, when it transitions to the exit from the walk side, it's going to automatically be replaced into the entry and back into idle down. There are some things to know about the transitions though. For example, it's not an instant transition by default. So you'd actually have to click settings, and the transition duration by default is 0.25 seconds, which may not be a bad thing. But if you want instant animation changes, we would change that. So for example, we would switch off fixed duration. We can set it to 0. And can transition to self, we probably don't want that, because then we're going to have the animation continuously repeat in a weird fashion. So we would disable that. Now what I can do is I can enable this just to test it out, and it'll always be true. But now we have an astronaut that's running, and until that becomes false, which as of right now it's never going to be false, it's going to run forever. So let's add some code now. So I mean, we're halfway through this, and we've got physics, we've got collisions, we've got animations, graphics, and we haven't written any code yet. So that's kind of one of the joys of Unity, is you can get so much done without having too much code. And in a lot of other game engines, or even back 5 years ago, you had to do a lot of the collisions and all that stuff manually, and it was a chore inside of your code. So let's go ahead and add some scripts so that way we can add logic. So in Unity, everything is script-based. So scripts are assigned to every game object, and they're kind of isolated to that game object. So I'll have, for example, a player script, which will control everything about my player. I might have a script that has that's attached to an enemy, and that enemy script will do everything for that enemy and not too much else other than what's ever involved for that enemy. You can have a bullet script, so on and so forth. So it really depends. So I'm going to go to Assets, and I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call it Scripts just for naming conventions. And inside of that directory, I'm going to create a new C# file, and I'm just going to call it Player. And I'm going to open it up. So I'll drag Visual Studio Code over. Can somebody tell me if it's readable?
I
Or should
think
I
it
zoom in
is.
further?
I'm happily outvoted though.
This is something where I can actually control the zoom, unlike Unity, which is kind of hard.
Anybody want it to get bumped up more?
One more?
I'm asking. Wouldn't hurt.
That
Yeah,
better?
I think that's fine if that's not too jumbo sized for you.
No, it's fine for me.
That's
and I
better
can
for me.
actually, I think I could hide there we go. Make it a little more screen real estate there. All right, so this is a C# file for Unity. So it extends the mono behavior by default, which has lifecycle events for Unity. So for example, we have start, which is the first frame. So this method will be called on the first frame of animation for the game. We have update, which is continuous. We have other lifecycle events. We're not going to explore them all tonight, but they're all going to be doing different things. So we probably want a way, as of right now, to switch between animations, because that's what we did last. So we need to obtain reference to the animation controller on our player. So what we can do is we can add a new private variable. And this private variable is animation. I think it's animator. No, animation. If this doesn't work, we'll try animator. So animation. We need to obtain reference to it. We can do that on the first frame. So we can say animation equals get component. And the component that we're getting is the animated. Animation like that. It might be animator. I do it so many times that I forget which one is which. If it yells at us, we'll switch it over to animator. So we have the animation. Inside the update, we want to figure out what the user is pressing on the keyboard to move, to change the animation. So let's go ahead and add two more private variables. I'm going to say this is going to be a Boolean, and this is going to be do walk left. And we're going to say do walk right. So inside of the update, I'm going to say do walk left equals, and I'm going to say input.get get key. The key code is going to be in this case, the left arrow. And you can set it to whatever key code you want for Unity. We're going to do the same thing for right. Oops. All right, so we're getting the keyboard input for the arrow keys. Next up, well, we need to do something. So we can say if do walk left, else if do walk right, so we're walking right, else then we're not walking at all, kind of thing. So if we're walking left, let's go ahead and say, I really think this might be animator. I'm gonna change it to animator. Otherwise, it's gonna bother me here. Oops. All right, so if it's do walk left, we're going to say animator dot set bool. So we're getting that parameter that we added, which we call do walk. And we're going to say do walk is going to be true. And at least for now, the left and the right is going to be, they're both going to be true for now. And then else, it's going to be false. And when it's false, it should enter that exit stage, and then it should enter again. So let's go ahead and go back into Unity. It's going to yell at me right now if it's bad. It doesn't look like it's bad. So let's hit play. I think I left the animator over here as checked. So let's hit play again. So it's idle, and I'm going to hit the arrow key, and it didn't do anything. So it actually didn't do anything because the script, it's kind of orphaned right now. I never attached it to anything. I just have this random C# script in Unity. So what I want to do is I want to click on player, and I can either add a component for the script, or you could very easily just drag it over. And now we have that script on this particular game object. And you could have the same script on numerous game objects, and it'll be isolated to that particular game object. So if you don't think that if you have like 10 of the players and you move around one of them, well, in this case, they'll all move. But in certain circumstances, like they'll all individually have their own health points or etc. Let's go ahead and hit play. And it's running when I hit the arrow key. And when I let go of the arrow key, it doesn't instantly stop. So we can fix the transition here. So let's go back into the animator. So it doesn't instantly stop because our transition from walking side to exit after we've changed the do walk to false, well, we need to change the settings. So the exit time, we probably want it no exit time. We want it to stop immediately. And for the transition duration, probably instantly as well. So as soon as we let go. Let's go ahead and drop that. Let's go ahead and hit play again, and it should be instant this time. Yeah. So as soon as I let go of the arrow key, it instantly changes to the idle animation because I've changed the settings for the timing. But if I hit both arrow keys, we're only going left right now. So to resolve that, what we could do is we could create another animation clip with the right animation, but it's not necessary. We can just flip it. So we can flip it inside of our code. So if I open up Visual Studio Code, for example, inside of our do walk left, what I could do is I can say vector 3. So this is, even though that we're working with a 2D game, we're still in 3D space. So we have vector 3. We can say local scale equals transform. So transform means that we're getting the transform information. So the coordinate information, any kind of other information about the current game object. So whatever game object this script is attached to. We're going to get the local scale from it. And we want to do manipulation here. So we want to say local scale x equals -1. And then we can say transform, and I'll get to why this looks silly in just a second. But we can say transform local scale equals local scale. So in C, I don't know if it's a C# thing or a Unity thing, but it doesn't let me modify this property directly. It requires me to supply a vector to the local scale itself. So it wouldn't let me say dot x equals such and such. I have to actually create a vector for it, which is fine. It's not too much of a hassle. But I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it down here. Instead of a -1, I'm going to say +1. And basically, the local scale, the x, is just going to flip it along the horizontal axis. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to Unity. It's going to refresh. I'm going to play it. I'm going to hit the right arrow key, and it looks like I have them flipped. So I'll just change the negative and the positive. But same animation clip, but we've just flipped them so it looks like they're running in a different direction. So let's flip it real quick, and then we'll actually add movement. I'll change this to a +1 and this to a -1. So that's the animation so far in a nutshell. So let's do movement. So because we are working with physics, we have to move a certain way. We have to move based on the rigid body, because the rigid body, we can't just move the game object itself using a transform, because I have access to the X and Y position and the Z position in the transform itself. I can't just move that, because then we're moving the game object and we're leaving the rigid body information behind. So to move with physics, we can either add force to our game object, or we can change the velocity of our game object. Now, they'll both do different things. So if you add force to your game object, it's going to push your game object. So it's going to have kind of a cooldown as well. So if you're playing a game and you play a level that's kind of like it's icy, when you add force, it kind of gives you that icy, frictionless feeling. So you kind of continuously slide until you stop. Whereas velocity, you have more precision over how you can control your movement. So we're going to work with the velocity for this example. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get access to the rigid body, just like we've gotten access to the animator, because we want to control the velocity of that rigid body. So I'm going to say private, and I'm going to say rigid body 2D. I'm going to call it that. And I'm going to say RB2D equals get component. So now we have access to the rigid body component that's currently on our game object that this script is attached to. We're also going to want to maybe create a public variable to represent the speed or the velocity itself. So we're going to say public. I'm going to make this a float, and this is going to be movement speed. So with Unity, I could have easily made this a private variable, and I could have hard-coded a movement speed. But by making it public, if I went into the Unity inspector, after it refreshes here, if I went into the Unity inspector here, I clicked on player, I scroll down to where my script is. Well, now I have a movement speed field. So every public variable that you add to your script is going to be accessible in the inspector. So we can set it in the inspector itself. And the cool thing about this is if this script is attached to multiple game objects, I can edit these independently. Whereas if I hard coded them as a private variable, well, all of the scripts are going to experience the same, or all of the game objects are going to experience the same data. So let's go ahead and make that movement speed maybe 3. We can always play around with it. I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm not going to do the movement inside of the update. So in Unity, there's update and then there's fixed update, and they're both part of the life cycle. So update, even though it's on a per frame basis, it's not advisable to update physics in the update function or the update method. You want to use fixed update for anything that involves physics, because how Unity processes it is slightly different. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say, and I'll scroll down a little bit. I'll say void fixed update. And the behavior is pretty much the same from a development perspective from coding. It's just how Unity does things behind the scenes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this do walk left stuff, and we're just going to clear it out because we're still going to pay attention to the key presses that happen in the update. We're just going to do all of our changes to the physics inside of the fixed update. So for do walk left, let's go ahead and say RB2D, which is our rigid body. And I'm going to say velocity equals new vector 2. So we have a X and a Y velocity. And we're going to say 1.0 F. So this is for float. And we're going to times it by the movement speed. That's going to be for the X directions. For the Y, we don't want to touch the velocity for the Y because we're not going to have a jump. So what we can do is we can say rb2d.velocity.y. So it's just going to copy whatever the y velocity was before we started touching this. So for falling, that y velocity will be applied still, but we're not actually going to change it manually.
Is the fixed update, is that just so that it's not tied to per frame?
So I believe with a fixed update, you're not guaranteed a process during each frame. Yeah, it could happen every frame, but you're not guaranteed that it'll happen every frame. Whereas the regular update will be every frame.
Does that mean like it can do in between frames, like 2.5 frames, or is it locked into it, or is it something where it happens every frame or every 3 frames or every 10 frames?
Which, the fixed update or the regular update?
The fixed.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on however Unity handles the physics engine behind the scenes. There's certain things that don't need to happen every frame, and it just figures that out for you. There are other ways to do it beyond the velocity. I mean, you could change the rigid body position manually, in which case you can have it move based on a movement speed and the clock, the frames, the time scale of the actual machine that's being used, so based on the system time. So there's different ways to approach it. But let me copy this. So this will be -1. So it'll be velocity in the other direction. And then in the event that we're no longer walking, well, we're going to leave the y velocity alone, but this is going to be 0. So if I play this, we should be able to move. We fell. Looks like I got my negatives mixed up this time. And based on the physics, my sprite has now rotated based on falling off that edge. So we can actually change that. So I'm going to change the directions of the arrow keys because I have them flipped. And then we're also going to change the rotation issue. So it might not be an issue. It depends on the game that you're building. But for me, I'm going to click player. I'm going to go to the rigid body 2D. I'm going to go to constraints, and I'm going to freeze it for the Z rotation. And now if I fall off that ledge, it will not rotate like it did. Now, if I go back into the editor and I flip these negatives and positives, we should have something a lot better to work with. Yeah. So I fell. I can move around. Everything's great. And I can even fall endlessly off the cliff. So it's good so far. We have a player. It moves. We have collisions, physics, all of that good stuff. Now maybe we want to get an enemy in there and process further collision information. So this might be typical in the game. Or maybe you want to add coins that the astronaut collects, or fuel. I don't know. You could be inventive in your game. Whatever you want will work. So what we're going to do is we can add another game object. And I'm just going to create an empty game object. There are kind of shortcuts here, but for learning purposes, it's probably best we start with empty. And I'm going to call this one enemy. It's empty. You can't see it. It doesn't do anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the pixel adventure. I'm going to go to main characters. I'm going to choose this ninja frog. I believe there's an idle in here. So I'm going to add a sprite renderer. And I'm going to click on idle. It says 32 by 32 based on what the author has provided. We're left with 100 here. So I'm going to change this 32 by 32 and apply it. So now what I can do is I can go back to enemy, expand the idle. I'll just drag this first keyframe over. And now we've got a little frog there. which I'll just move right there. If I were to play it, nothing would, I mean, the astronaut would still do its business, but the frog would just float there because we don't have any physics on it. We don't have any collision information on it. So we're going to do the same thing we did for the astronaut. So I'm going to add a rigid body. And this rigid body is unique to the frog. I'm going to add a box collider. I'm going to probably edit that box collider because that's it's too generous as far as boundaries go. So I'm going to edit the collider. Doesn't need to be perfect. It's whatever you're happy with. I'm going to stop editing. So now if I click play and all I've done was added the rigid body and the box collider, the frog should fall and stay on the floor. And also, if I hit it, well, these two collide and I just knocked it off the edge. But the collision information is applies to everything. So it's not just the player and the floor. And we could customize what collision information actually happens. So if we wanted to, maybe the frog doesn't collide with the player, but the frog collides with the floor, or so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and change things up. So I promised that we would see how to animate that when there's no animation clip provided for us. So that might be the next step. So it has an idle animation or an idle sprite, but no animation in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an animator here for the enemy. This is the animator controller. I'm going to just right click in here and I'm going to say create, and I'm going to create an animator controller. I'm going to call this one frog. And I am going to drag it over to this enemy. So now the enemy now has the frog animation controller, which as of right now is empty because we don't have anything. So let's go ahead and change that. Let's go ahead and create an animation clip. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say new. Actually, not new. I'm going to open up the window. I'm going to scroll down to animation. I am going to open up the animation window, which is a new window. I'm going to dock it next to the tile palette. This is where we start creating our clips to work with. I have the enemy selected. I'm going to say create. I'm going to create an idle animation clip inside that frog directory. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to click on each frame inside of that idle sprite sheet. So I'm going to select them all. And I'm going to drag it into the animation window right here. So it's a little hard to see, but I've got several different keyframes here for each of those frames that I dragged over. But if I were to run it, it's running at 60 frames per second for a lot less than 60 frames. So let's go ahead and run that. But also notice that it defaulted to idle now, that idle animation clip. So let's run it. The frog might look like it's going to blast off here because it's animating too quickly now. So let's slow it down a bit. Let's click on the idle and maybe change it to 20 frames per second. Slow it down. So hit play. Now it kind of bounces kind of like the astronaut does, real slow. Is that visible? I mean, I don't know if there's any kind of lag or anything. All right.
The frame
perfect.
rate on Zoom's pretty low, but it made sense what you were saying.
Sure. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So I can still collide with it. Nothing great. What we probably want to do now is we probably want to change the status when we collide. Maybe the astronaut gets hurt or maybe the frog gets hurt. Who knows? So let's make the frog get hurt. So we're going to create a new animation clip. So we're going to say when it's hit, we're going to change this to 32 pixels because that's what these images are. I am going to click on the enemy and I'm going to create a new animation clip. I'm going to call this one hit. I'm going to expand that sprite sheet for hit. I'm going to click on these very few frames here and I'm going to drag them over. This is another clip. I'm going to slow it down to 20 frames per second, which may even be fast. And I'm going to go to the Animator controller. Enemy is selected right now, not the player. If I click player, I got the different animation controller there. So this is enemy. Hit is kind of standing around there in the void. So let's go ahead and make a transition. Let's go ahead and create a variable. This time around, we're going to use a trigger. So a trigger is like a Boolean in Unity, but a trigger automatically sets itself to false right after it becomes true. So this could be useful for jumping, for being hit, for numerous circumstances. Whereas we chose the Boolean for walking because we want to continuously walk for as long as it's true. So different circumstances. I'm going to say this trigger is going to be maybe, I don't know, keep it consistent here, do hit. I'm going to click on this transition line and I'm going to say the conditions to transition to hit will be do hit. The timing, I'm going to make the transition instant by setting it to 0. I'm going to say that I can't transition to myself, creating some kind of weird redo of itself. I don't know a good word to call it there. When it's done, I'm going to make a new transition to exit. When it's done, I am going to say that it has an exit time, or it doesn't have an exit time. It's not going to automatically exit. Actually, it will. I think that's fine. So the transition duration, though, we do want to change. So we don't want it to hit. We don't want the trigger to hit and then immediately exit. We want it to kind of do its animation for a second, and then we want it to stop. So we're going to say that it's going to animate for 2 seconds before it exits. Let's go ahead and kind of bring this together. So we're never going to call hit yet because we don't have the logic in place. We need to be able to call this do hit. And we could technically do this within the player script, but it's a good idea to keep your script specific to the game object that they're representing. So it's probably a better idea that we create a script for the enemy and have the animations in the enemy script. So if I went to assets and I went to scripts, I can create a new C# script. I'm going to call this one enemy. No real specific naming convention. It doesn't matter what you call it. I'm going to open it, and we're going to kind of repeat our behavior that we did. We're going to obtain the animator. So we're going to say private animator. We're going to get it from the first frame. And we're not going to update anything. We can leave it there. What we're actually going to be concerning ourselves with is what happens when the collision happens, because that's when we want the animation to take effect. So we can make use of a method that becomes available when we have a collider on our game object. So we're going to say void. We're going to say on collision enter 2D. So there's a few different collision methods that you can make use of. So there's the enter, which is upon the start of the collision. There's an exit for when the collision ends, and then there's like a on collision 2D or on collision stay 2D, where you are continuously colliding with the object. So it could vary by circumstance of what you want to do. But we're going to say collision 2D. And I'll just stick with the C# convention here of dropping the bracket down. As somebody who doesn't use C# that often, this really bothers me, but it's a normal thing for C#, I think. So let's go ahead and say that we want to change the animation. So we're going to say animator dot set trigger, and we're going to say do hit. And it's a trigger, so we don't have to provide it a true or false. So let's go ahead and save it. It's going to refresh. Animator could not be found. Did I misspell something? Line 13. Oh, right here. My autocomplete in Visual Studio Code must have got me. All right, that should be Animator. All right, it'll refresh. I want to click on enemy. I want to drag this enemy script over to the component so it adds it. And I want to hit play. So you'll notice that it showed the animation there. It showed the hit animation because we are not having any kind of determination on what collides with. Right now we're saying if it collides with anything, play that animation one time. So it collided with the ground, and that's why it played that animation. If I hit the player, it plays the animation. So we want to make sure that it only shows that animation when we hit. So we're going to go into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to just add some logic here. So I'm going to say if collision.gameObject.name. So what we're saying is check to see what we collided with, get the name from the game object. So with Unity, we have the ability to get tag information and name information. The name is what we've called it in the actual project settings, and I'll show you that in just a minute. We've actually called our player with a capital P. So if we collide with the player, then we set the trigger and not the ground. So if I saved it and it went to Unity, so this is the name player right here. If I wanted to, I could set a tag, and we can go by tag instead. And tag could be useful if we have maybe numerous types of enemies and we wanted to classify them all as enemy. It might be an easy way to do that. So if I hit play, it didn't show the animation. I hit it, it animated, and it animated for about 2 seconds before exiting based on the transition information that we added to our animator controller for the frog. And I can still push it off, and I can still fall off, and everything's great. That's kind of 2D game development in Unity in a nutshell. So you're gonna, if you were to do any kind of game, it's gonna follow the same strategy. Now, in this particular game, since I defined specifically keyboard, the left and right arrows, it's probably better suited for PC. But there are other inputs that you can obtain. So for example, Unity lets you get like swipe inputs, which is where you would actually add your mobile logic. So while probably 95% of our game could be reused for mobile as well, we would have to take into consideration some of the controller-based interaction with our mobile game, or even Nintendo or PlayStation or etc. So it's pretty easy to cross compile it. Any questions?
I thought
Is
it
this too
was
fast or
interesting.
too slow? I'm curious.
I thought it was interesting that you used, because in a lot of these game engines that are like, even ones that are like visual scripting, they have different key press states, like key down, key released, or something like that. I thought that was interesting that you handled that with Boolean rather than doing it through a different state of like a key press.
Yeah, you can do it that way too. I've seen it. Like there's also mouse events as well, and you can do like on mouse down kind of stuff. So you have a lot of flexibility, and in addition, I mean, you don't even have to use. If I go to player, I mean, I used specifically the arrow key. You can actually define specific key combinations in the Unity editor. And in exchange, you can say like get horizontal or get vertical. And in that case, like by default, the horizontal and the vertical, they're not only going to be the arrow keys, but they're going to be the A, W, S, and D keys as well. So it depends on what you want to accomplish.
Nick, just for the folks that don't know the pricing for Unity, do you happen to have? I don't think we discussed it at the beginning of the talk. Do you want to mention like what it costs to buy and use Unity for a game?
Yeah, Unity is pretty awesome in the sense that you can use it for free. You can publish and sell your games for free, and you won't pay them anything until you make $100,000 or more on your game. At which case, it's not like they take a commission out of it. They just make you buy the pro tier, which is like $2,000 a year, which isn't even that bad. If you're making $100,000 on your game, it's a small price to pay.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Does anybody else
I
have
a
any
question.
questions?
Yeah,
Go for it.
I was just gonna ask, do you think Unity is like the best application to use when you're trying to develop a game, or do you prefer other platforms?
I mean, the winners right now are going to be Unreal or Unity.
Okay.
Unity, the barrier to entry is a lot lower than Unreal because Unreal is C++. I know that there's others like Godot. I don't know which language that uses. There's Phaser, which is JavaScript. I've done plenty of Phaser stuff too. But Unity is pretty simple.
Yeah. Is there any
It's
preference?
hard to compete against it.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any like preference you'd say between the different, like between Phaser and Unity and all these different, like, is there like, if you're trying to develop a certain type of game, would you pick like Unity over another platform, or is they all about the same?
No, I mean, so for example, Phaser, if you're a JavaScript developer and you want to build like a browser-based game or even like a progressive web application type game, that might be a good thing to do. There's a lot of things that Phaser does that's a lot easier than Unity. But then again, Phaser doesn't really have a drag and drop kind of interface like we saw here. It's a lot of it is manual. I haven't touched Unreal because the C++ stuff scares me away. But I don't do C# development full time. I'm mostly JavaScript. I do Go. So the C# stuff, the learning curve is small. I like Phaser too. I've done plenty of stuff with Phaser, but Unity is going to get you a more professional experience, and especially if you want to compile to those other platforms as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
There's some
I've
good
heard.
games that were built with Unity. Like one of my personal favorites is Hollow Knight for the Nintendo Switch was built with Unity. And I know Fall Guys, if you're familiar with Fall Guys, was made with Unity, and that's
Right.
multi-platform as well.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Unity. I've heard a lot that one of the other benefits is if you're looking to get a job in the game industry,
Yeah.
a lot of indie developers are using Unity. So having experience in that is going to give you a major plus. I think one of the things that the other benefits of Unity is that it's more universal as far as the types of games that you can build with it. There are a lot of other games that are a lot of other game engines that are simpler to use, but they're really sort of designed to do like only platformers. So if you're not doing a platformer, that's not something that you want to use, or you're not doing a web-based game like you want to do mobile.
Yeah.
Those types of things.
And don't let me fool you with the 2D game because there are a ton of good games that I play on console that are built with Unity that are 3D.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. It's like, which one would you prefer for like building like high graphics 3D game? Would that be Unity, obviously, or would there be
I think
other
it
platforms
depends.
that be better?
I think it depends. If I had to take a wild guess, Unreal it will probably get you the performance
Okay.
off of some of the games that you're trying to build, but the amount of people building those games is probably small.
Right.
And even so, I don't know if they are using a homegrown framework. Like if you look at games like Cyberpunk or the Elder Scrolls that are massive in graphic accomplishments and things like that. I don't think they're using either. I think they're probably using something homegrown.
Okay.
No
And
one might
you're
have
shooting yourself in the foot if you're starting off and trying to do like AAA graphics, because that's going to eat all your time and you're going to have no time to learn the basics like movement, collisions, and things like that.
Right. No, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just asking as far as like, because I don't really know Unity or Phaser or any of these. I'm just kind of a student right now, so I was just kind of trying to figure out like what kind of avenues you can go down for each platform. But that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Unity is definitely like the more wide range general use.
And the other thing too is both Unity definitely is good for this also, but Unreal A lot of their push now is visualization. So if you're a game artist, you might want to use Unreal because you can do your super, you want your artwork, the super high-res artwork that looks to look its best. So
Right.
you have
Yeah.
like out of the box a really awesome lighting model and ambient occlusion and all those sorts of things.
Right. Is that because there's is that the graphics engine that's allowing Unreal to have like better resolution on the artwork, or is it something different that I'm not thinking of?
It's something that they're promoting now. They're going after the Hollywood previs market.
Okay.
So a lot of that functionality is, they're playing to their strengths that were already there.
Okay.
And then they're building on top of it.
Okay. Thank you.
A while, so I run a meetup group in Tracy as well. So I had somebody from Unity come down to speak at our group once, and she wasn't in the game space for Unity. So they're also doing non-gaming artwork type stuff too. Like they do renderings for like I forgot what car company they were doing it for, Mercedes or something, where they did a render. So they have all kinds of unique and interesting things that they use for film and things like that, commercials. Nolan might have more information on that since he was
medical visualizations and things like that too, for sure. Simulations.
I mean, I don't know. This is an asset pack for $40 that includes street stuff, and it looks pretty good to me. I don't know. I'd play it.
You were going to say something a minute ago, Nick? I might have more information on.
Yeah, you were in the game development space. You probably know more about people using frameworks versus homegrown solutions. And
I was, but this was quite a while ago, and all the games that I worked on were homegrown frameworks. Yeah. The Unreal Engine was a thing that existed back then, but it existed because the game Unreal was using it, and they had just started. There were a couple of other games that I think had started licensing it, but it was not one of the de facto standard platforms like it is today. When I was doing that, most everything I did was C++ and proprietary engines of some sort.
Oh wow, interesting. I actually have a question about that. Because you said you were in the game development world.
Yeah.
Like, what type of programming would you say is valuable for that industry? If like you're trying to develop your own frameworks or like create your own homegrown engine, like what type of programming, I guess, would you recommend would be good to learn?
Writing your own engine. So for the stuff so full disclosure, this was a long time ago that I worked on in the game industry at the time, and I think this is still true. At the time, the thing that worked well to get your foot in the door with the company was have a good demo that you made. So resumes are nice, and resumes help for a lot, but what a lot of the studios wanted to see was give me something I can click on and run that you made. And it did not have to be cutting edge. It did not have to be state of the art. No one is expecting somebody at home working part-time after hours in their apartment to compete with a AAA studio and go head to head with them. They're not expecting you to have the next Cyberpunk, clone ready to go.
Right.
But they want to have something that shows, the mechanics of what goes into making a game. You have the general idea of how to make a game, how to finish a product, and how to put something out. And so if you can put, even a small demo will work really well. There was a studio I worked at. So I worked at Maxis, was one of the places I worked at where they make SimCity and The Sims and all that. And they hired this guy, John, to be one of the developers. He was interviewed to work on a game. The story I was told was that John got called on a Friday. He was at home playing. He had a classic arcade cabinet at home in his apartment of the game Robotron. He was playing Robotron. Maxis called him and said, "Hey, we want you to come in on Monday for an interview." John hung up the phone and said, "Oh, what can I make over the weekend that will impress them?" He made a real quick Robotron clone over the weekend on disk. Yeah, not a super great big crazy game, not a Quake or Unreal Engine crazy something other, just like Robotron in a couple of days. And what we were all told, whether this is true, I don't know, but it was a story that went on for quite a while after that, was that John showed up for the interview, sitting next to two gentlemen in suits and ties with the resumes, ready to go. And John showed up, jeans, flip-flops, long hair, like he just usually wore everything. But he had a disc in his hand with the game on it. And brought that into the director's office and said, I made this over the weekend. And he loaded the game up and it fired right up on the director's laptop. And the director said, you can send the other guys home. This guy's hired because he has proof that he can do it. And so yeah, demos and things like that go a long way.
Wow, that's super valuable. Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize that.
You also have other avenues like YouTube. Like,
Yeah.
so you can just make a YouTube development channel so you can, that way they can understand like your process, you know, they can see your growth and all of that sort of thing, how you tackle challenges.
There are a lot of platforms out there now too, where you can basically put your demo out and sell it, or just, you know, put it out as a thing in the world too. There's sites like itch.io where you can just make a game and put it out for pennies or nothing at all if you want. And the public can download it and play it and give you feedback and everything. And sites like that can be really valuable.
I think you can
Yeah.
publish to Google Play still for like $20.
That too, yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. I'm just trying to process it all.
Also,
Yeah,
I think like if you want to get yourself like into the community, something I've been wanting to do, but I've never gotten around to is like join game jams.
Okay, what are those exactly?
They're like competitions where people, you know, it's like a event meetup where, you know, people get together. Well, I guess you have to do them virtual now, but you get together and people separate out into groups of people, you know, little 3 or 4 person teams, and spend 24 hours making a game. And what you know, just show off what you did.
Oh, that's awesome. It's kind of like a hackathon, but for games.
Yep.
Cool.
Eric was asking in the chat a while ago about Nick. He wants to know if the code and project files you made are going to be posted online anywhere so that people can download them.
Yeah, I could see about putting them online. I'll see. You gotta be careful though, because I mean, I used asset packs that were free, and I don't know the licensing on those.
No is a perfectly acceptable answer if there's legality concerns you have. Yeah.
Worst case, Nolan, did you record this?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, worst case, I mean, it took what, an hour? We watch it again.
Right.
Anywhere you get stuck.
Oh, that's
much code.
that'd be great. Where can I access this recording?
This will be on the Sac Interactive YouTube channel as soon as we have a chance to edit it a little bit and throw it online. So just keep, if you want to check our Facebook page or Twitter and things like that, I'll let you know when it goes up.
Thanks. Yeah, that's definitely enough for me. Thank you.
Sure. I bet. You bet. Any other questions before I stop the recording? All right. I guess I'll
plug my group, Nolan. Any shameless plugs?
Oh, nope. Now you go for it, Nick. Yeah, you've certainly earned a plug or two.
All right. Since we're in the relative area, right? Yeah. So, I mean, if you're interested in expanding on your meetup arsenal here, Tracy Devs, tracydevs.com is the group I run in Tracy. It's remote for now, so it's just like Nolan's, and we meet once a month on a Friday. So if you're interested, check it out.
Nick's group is a great group. It's similar to this one in that the topic is something to do with web and mobile development every month, and it's a really laid back, easy to belong to group. If anyone here is interested in presenting to a group, and if you're like a first-time speaker and don't have a lot of experience doing that, I highly recommend Nick's group. It's a really, really easy, comfortable environment to start presenting in.
We've had a few first-timers. It's been good.
Yeah, it's been real good. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thanks very much,
sure.
Nick.